Well, hello England. I think I'm talking to more people than are just here, which is a kind of a scary prospect, I think, so excuse my shaky start. I want to talk to you, I will talk to you if the clicker works. Great, I knew this was going to happen. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about a piece of research that we've done with the Royal Shakespeare Company and Tate. My colleague Chris Hall and I have been hanging around RSC and Tate for a long time now, and we knew quite a lot about the professional development work that they did with teachers. What we didn't know anything about at all was what teachers did when they went back to school, and we didn't know much about what actually the kids got from what the teachers did in the classroom. So this was a piece of research to follow that kind of question, and it was funded by Arts Council England, and it's only just finished, and we've been working for 3 years on trying to get the answers to questions about how teachers actually turn their professional development into pedagogies and what it is the students get from that. And we worked in 30 schools, 15 nominated by the RSC and 15 nominated by Tate. So this was a kind of purposeful sample. We weren't looking for a representative group of schools. We were looking for schools that had long-term engagement with these two organisations. We were looking at a kind of an optimum case. And in addition to ordinary kind of case study work, going in talking to the teachers, talking to the students, observing lessons, we also did a survey of all the students from GCSE and above in the schools. And so we've got some numbers. This is a piece of research which is, of a kind of reasonable scale. And we were able to compare the survey results from the students in the 30 schools with a national equivalent sample, which was taken from the DCMS survey taking part. So there's some point of comparison, which is very important, as I'm going to explain, in the kind of thinking process that we've been through, in thinking about what actually happens in schools where the arts are taken, in secondary schools, where the arts are taken really seriously. Okay. So we spoke to, you can see the number, 1,442 students. Apologies for the typo here. I'm not divine, so I have like a Persian carpet, an error in my slide. Students told us a lot about why they enjoyed the arts, and you've heard some of those kinds of reasons today. It's remarkably similar what students say about why they like the arts. They talk about the arts being a kind of continuum, it connects them to things that have happened in the past, it's about today, it's about what they think is going to happen in the future, what they want to happen in the future. They learn all kinds of things from their engagement in the arts. They're able to do things they never imagined they were going to be able to do. They learn discipline, they're challenged, they work with each other, they learn deep kind of disciplinary knowledges and skills, they learn to interpret, they become critical, they get very good at kind of deconstructing, they're also good at taking criticism very often as well and internalising that, so they develop their own kind of internal critics. And they also feel in schools, particularly at the moment, when schools, for various kinds of reasons, secondary schools in particular, are very focused on exam results. They often find going into, in our case, the art room or the drama room, a great sense of relief. It's different from the rest of the school. They have different relationships with their visual art and performing arts teachers and sometimes their English teacher. And these are kind of places where they can do different kind of work. They do long-term projects, they're negotiated, they're very often about things that they care about deeply. And this is quite different from passing an exam, from the kind of pressure that there is in their other subjects. And they think that because of that, what they're learning in their art subjects is actually going to be very helpful for them in later life, because they've learnt about, in short, how to actually have an idea and bring it to fruition. They've learnt a lot of stuff that they think is important in life. And like the young people we've heard today, all the students that we talked to were very frustrated that that wasn't understood, and that the arts were seen as a kind of second-rate, dumbed-down subject, and that the EBAC in particular was something which had elevated some subjects above the arts. They were very clear in telling us that the arts were not an easy option. They were often hard work. They often demanded more time and more discipline than other subjects. God. Okay. So, the national survey that we did was the schools were all over England. So this wasn't like a lot of bits of research, a kind of London-centric project. It was, in the end, it actually turned out, although the schools were all arts-rich schools, it turned out to be a relatively representative sample of the kinds of schools that there are in England. There were 3 special schools. There was one extremely posh independent school up north, and a range of different kinds of schools around the rest of the country. Now, in the survey, the students told us that, for a lot of them told us that, you know, their family introduced them to the arts. But there were a significant number of them, about a quarter of the students that we interviewed, those 4,477 students who answered the survey, told us that the school had introduced them to the arts. So that's not insignificant, and that's important. What's more important is that a bigger number of them told them that the school was important in supporting their involvement in the arts. So while families are, of course, really key and important, the school has also got a really important role here. And it's important in a number of ways. What we saw in the survey, and what I want to show you, is the red are the schools that we were in. Okay, so these are what we call the tail schools. And in terms of engaging with the kind of cultural activities that there are outside school, in most cases, there was higher participation by students in these schools than the national average, except in the case of going to the art museum, which was bitterly disappointing for Tate, of course, but it may be to do with the fact that art museums are, you know, there's not that many of them, and actually it often takes a bit of effort to get to places like museums. What was more interesting was that the students' own production, arts production, so we've talked about them as kind of audiences, if you like, but their own arts production was actually very much greater than the national average. And that's quite significant, I think. Even not huge numbers of them more read a book out of school than the national average. But if you look at the next one, lots more of them performed in a play, lots more of them were engaged in dance, lots more of them were engaged in making films, lots more of them were engaged in making movies. So something is going on in these schools, that the arts-rich schools, as we call them, where students are being encouraged and supported to engage at a higher than average level in cultural activities, both as critical and appreciative audiences and as cultural producers in their own right. So let me talk a little bit about how we've tried to make sense of that, and how we've tried to explain these particular results that we've got. So we've gone not to the UN Declaration of Rights for Children, but in fact the UN Declaration for Human Rights, the rights that apply to everybody regardless of their age. And Article 27 says that everyone has the right to participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts and to share in scientific advancement and its benefits, or lack of benefits if we're talking about climate collapse. But we were interested in the notion of participation in the cultural life of the community and what that actually meant, because that's what we saw the young people doing. They were producers as well as audiences. They were taking part, not in a kind of small activity in school. They were actually out of school in their own time, engaged in culture in a very active kind of way. So the first thing we had to think about is how do we understand culture? Now I'm going to put up a few kind of, academic quotations here, but I'm going to try and explain our take on it in kind of more simple sense. I'm trained in anthropology in part, in my kind of higher ed bit, and there's a very famous anthropologist called Clifford Geertz who talks about culture through a metaphor, and he talks about understanding culture and humans as being like the spider and the web. He says the spider can't survive without its web, and the web can't exist without the spider. In other words, they're completely interdependent. They are one. So if you think about culture as something, or cultural practices, as something that humans do, it's just part of who we are and how we live in this world, then we can think differently about what it might mean to be a cultural citizen. Now, normally when we think about citizens, we think about the state, but actually we're citizens of all kinds of scales of sort of little polis, little kind of democracies, if you like, little groups. And they might be in our neighbourhood, they might be in our family, they might be in our school, they might be at a regional level, they might be at a global level. So if we think about citizenship, detaching citizenship from the notion of the state and thinking it instead that cultural citizenship is engaging in various ways and at different scales in public conversations that are going on. And these conversations use take a range of different forms. And we've seen some of that today, haven't we? We've seen the young people in their podcasting actually taking part in a public conversation using the media of radio. So if culture is part of who we are, then cultural citizenship is supporting young people to express not only who they are, but also their individual and collective views, experiences, opinions, needs and desires. And so while citizenship in the formal state sense might be something that is denied to some young people, and it's denied to all kinds of people who, for example, have arrived here seeking to become citizens of this country. If we think of citizenship in this more cultural sense, then we can think about how it is that we understand, hear, value, dialogue with all of the kinds of voices that there actually are around us. So arts education has a very particular role in cultural citizenship, because the arts provide a range of media, platforms, genres, different sort of meaning-making systems, visual, music, movement, through which we can communicate with each other, through which we can take part in this kind of public sets of conversations, whether they're local, regional, national, global, whatever. And that's for us what we're seeing the young people doing when they're actually engaged in cultural production. They're not learning how to be cultural citizens in the future, they're cultural citizens now, they're doing it now. And the important thing about this sort of way of approaching an understanding of culture is that this is not a notion of culture which is based in institutions. Of course there are cultural institutions. It's not a notion of culture which says there's some culture which is important and some culture which is not. It doesn't fall into those kind of high and low culture sorts of divides. It is, if you like, as my colleague Nick Stevenson describes it, a kind of cosmopolitan approach. It's a kind of democratic approach to understanding what it is that cultural citizens might do. Now, obviously, there's a lot more we could say about that, but time says I've got to go on to the next bit, which is to say, how is it that these schools actually, what did the schools do that actually supported young people to be practising cultural citizens, to be critical, appreciative audiences and active cultural producers? Well, this is our little explanation. And the key thing, I think, is, as Darren Chetty, I think, has already said today, kids don't come to school culture-free. They come, if you like, with little virtual rucksacks in which all sorts of cultural experiences come along with them. It might be gardening, it might be sewing, it might be cooking, it might be engaging with sacred texts in churches, temples, mosques, whatever. It might be going to a gallery, it might be listening to stories from grandma, it might be reading a book. All kids are not culture-free. They come with stuff. And the teacher's job is really, in part, to open all the cultural rucksacks in the class and pour them, all those school bags, and pour them out and see what a kind of rich array of resources, cultural resources, there are in the class, and then think about how to connect those to other cultural resources that will allow students to become active cultural citizens. And we say that there are three things that we've seen in the schools that are really important, and I'm just going to flash these up. The first is what we saw were what we call arts broker teachers. These were not teachers who simply taught a subject. They taught the importance and they embodied the importance of what it meant to actually engage in cultural practices. They were actively involved themselves and they wanted to encourage their students to love and enjoy the arts and culture in the way that they did. And you can see that the teachers don't do that by themselves. Some teachers do. They do try really hard, and they're in schools, this is not this research, it's other research, where they're unsupported by their school hierarchies. However, when teachers are in a school where they are supported, there's a kind of, again, sort of spider web sort of relationship. You know, the school benefits from the arts broker teachers and the teachers benefit in turn from the kind of support that the school has to offer, not least of which, in the case of our arts-rich schools, was the fact that there was an extremely robust and varied junior school curriculum. It wasn't all about choice. There was a very solid junior high school curriculum which covered all the arts, where there were experienced and well-resourced and qualified teachers. The school had a rich array of arts partnerships and opportunities for students as well as for teachers. So that was really important. But again, that wasn't enough. The arts teachers in particular, and remember we were interested in the professional development opportunities. The cultural organisations that we saw, and I have to say that although the schools we researched in for 3 years, were involved with the RSC and Tate, they actually had loads of other partnerships as well. It was one of their characteristics. And the kinds of professional development that was on offer to them is what we call immersive. So in other words, it was embodied, its teachers got to do things for themselves. If it was about writing, the teachers wrote. If it was about Shakespeare, then the teachers got to actually perform and act and direct. So the teacher's kind of artist self was part of this professional development process as well. And we can say a lot more about that, and you can read a lot more about what we've got to say about professional development. But what we're suggesting is at the heart of this relationship is a mutual respect between the cultural organisation and teachers. Neither of them saw that they could do it by themselves. There was a kind of mutual recognition of each other's expertise. And the cultural organisations didn't come in and give the teachers lesson plans, nor did the teachers tell the cultural organisations how it was that they expected them to behave with their students, to just give you a couple of examples of the kind of things that I've seen in other research projects. So what we are arguing is that this is a kind of an ecology, that if we want to produce active cultural citizens, then we need all of these things to be working. We need to have teachers who are able to bring arts and cultural practices into the classroom, who are well supported by cultural organisations, in schools where the arts and culture are actually valued. Of course, how are we going to get that? That's, of course, the big question. I'm not going to leave you with any challenge other than to say that it seems to me that what we have at the moment is a government who think that only their children should be active cultural citizens. As we can see from the kind of people who are dominant in the cultural industries at the moment, I think what we need to be able to do is to talk about the importance to democracy, the importance not only to individuals but actually to society as a whole, to have everybody engaged actively in arts and culture. Thank you.